Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Women Winning Wednesdays. I am your host, attorney Elsa W. Smith. I'm also the owner of the law offices of Elsa W. Smith, where our mission is to empower women through estate planning. We've got a great show to you today. The topic of today's show is we're just living together. Estate planning risks for couples over 50. Now, for some people, that might, we might get into some touchy subjects. The goal of this show is not to come off as preachy. We're not attacking anyone or discussing issues from a moral perspective. This episode is strictly to highlight some of the risks, some of the problems that couples who are over 50 and are cohabiting are facing. I'm going to be sharing what some statistics show, then sharing some reasons why folks over 50, and by the way, I'm including myself as well, although I am married, full disclosure, but I am over 50. But folks in our age demographic, what are some of the issues and what are the reasons that we choose to cohabit with a life partner, love interest, etc. So let's get right into it. Oops. Love when that happens. So first thing we're going to start off with are the statistics. Now, according to the Pew Research Center, the number of U.S. adults cohabiting in the U.S. Has continued to climb. And, better yet, let me stop, rewind, playback. I'm going to share an excerpt from a 2017 Pew article, Pew Research Center article. Here we go. As marriage rates have fallen, the number of U.S. adults in cohabiting relationships has continued to climb, reaching about 18 million in 2016. And this figure is up 29% since 2007, when 14 million adults were cohabiting. And that's according to the US Census Bureau data. The article goes on to say that roughly half of cohabitors, those living with an unmarried partner, are younger than 35, but an increasing number of Americans ages 50 and older are in cohabiting relationships. According to an analysis of the current population study, again, this is also done by Pew Research. In fact, cohabitors ages 50 and older represented about a quarter, or 23% of all cohabiting adults in 2016. Stick with me here. There's a little bit more information I need to give you. Since 2007, the number of cohabiting adults ages 50 and older grew by 75%. So this increase is faster than that of other age groups during that time period, and is driven in part by aging baby boomers. In 2016, 4 million adults ages 50 and older were cohabiting. And that's up from 2.3 million in 2007. By comparison, 8.9 million adults ages 18 to 34 were cohabiting last year. And that's up from 7.2 million. Last point. Most cohabitors surveyed, ages 50 and older, have previously been married, and including a majority who are divorced. Just over a tenth of cohabitors ages 50 and older are widowed, and that's a share that rises to 27% among cohabitors who are 65 and older. So still about 1/4 of cohabitors ages 50 and older have never been married. Okay. Now, I've given you some statistics. Hopefully, that did not cause you to glaze over and just, like the Charlie Brown Peanuts episode with the teacher, he's hearing wah, 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 wah. Bear with me. The stats are important to lay the groundwork, to give you the foundation of what some of these trends are, what the numbers show, because the numbers don't lie. But now I want to talk to you about reasons that seniors cohabit. So, for some, a prior bad marriage resulted in their reluctance to now remarry. Also, there may be, when folks reach a certain age, they tend to care less about what others think, and they want to just live their own lives. Another reason why seniors 50 and over choose to cohabit instead of marry is because that feels like that completes or is more satisfying to have that level of friendship in that way. Another concern, and this is very personal, they have concerns about their estate not passing to their children if they remarry. All right. One last concern, and this is a biggie. There are fears about caregiving strains involved in marriage. The thought here is that if you're not bound by marriage, you don't really have a duty to take on a caregiving role of the other person. I want to pause here, and I could almost hear a collective gasp coming through the internet from many of you. Folks, these decisions are very personal. And as I said in the promo post on social media, we're not evaluating this through a moral lens. However, I do think that it's important to share what is happening in our society. As an estate planning attorney, I help real people facing real life choices about their lives and their legacies. And I can only do that by providing a non-judgmental, safe space for that to happen. Okay. Now I want to look at financial reasons that seniors choose to cohabit. And again, we're looking at folks in the 50 plus age bracket. There are concerns about a potential loss of military and pension benefits. There's a concern also that cohabitation permits individuals to or not continue to receive Social Security or pension from a former spouse that they would lose if they were to remarry, right? Again, concerns about remarriage and what that means and how that affects benefits and other financial sources of or other streams of income. Another concern has to do with alimony. If you were in a long-term marriage that ended in divorce and you're receiving alimony, you're most likely going to have to give that up when you remarry. Again, you'd have to check the final judgment of divorce, but that certainly is a concern. Another concern is the fear of incurring liability for your partner's medical expenses. That's another reason why people are kind of gun shy about, not getting married. And then the last point in this area is that many higher income couples don't want to face a bigger tax hit. What do I mean? Getting married, if they're both individually pretty high income earners, when they get married, that's going to catapult them to an even higher tax bracket, which could result in a much higher tax burden. So, what are the risks of just living together? Right. And to first, before I touch on a few of the risks, I want to share two hypotheticals, two scenarios, and see if either one of these two scenarios describes your situation. And those of a certain age may appreciate the John Mellencamp references in this first example. You'll see what I mean in a second. Jack and Diane, a couple in their late 50s, started living together after a year of dating. Diane became a widow in her late 40s after losing her husband to pancreatic cancer. Around that time, Jack and his first wife had gone through a divorce shortly after their youngest child moved out of their home. Neither Jack nor Diane had any desire to remarry, despite the fact that they have amazing intimacy and were really committed to their relationship. It also made financial sense for Jack to move out of the home that he'd been renting since his divorce and into the home that Diane owned with her late husband. 2 years after Jack and Diane began living together, Jack was seriously injured in a construction accident at work. Now, here's the risk. Even though Jack's employer was able to call Diane and let her know what had happened, Diane was unable to get any information from the hospital about Jack's condition. Why? Because she's not his spouse, and he had not prepared an advance directive. Diane had no legal right to get any information or make any medical decisions on Jack's behalf. Their living situation had absolutely no bearing on their legal rights. However, if Jack and Diane had decided to get married, their marital status would have afforded each of them these rights simply based on the fact that they were officially husband and wife. Caveat. With the advance directive, it's always good to have something in writing. Yes, doctors are going to look to a spouse, but let's say if you were married and you didn't want your spouse to be the one making the calls, on whether or not to discontinue life-sustaining treatments, it's important to have these things in writing. But Jack and Diane would have had, Diane in this case would have had a stronger leg to stand on, if you will, if Jack had taken the time to put something in writing so that she can have an influence, she can have a say in Jack's care. Now, hypothetical number 2 has to do with Harry and Sally. Sally is older and wealthier than Harry. Sally is a retired doctor, and Harry is a photojournalist who is 10 years younger than her. They have a mutual understanding that Sally is going to support their lifestyle, which consists of traveling and fine dining. And then suddenly, Sally becomes ill and can no longer manage the couple's finances. Here's the risk. Under this scenario, unless Sally had given Harry a financial power of attorney, Sally's assets will probably be frozen by her financial institutions, her banks, and so forth. Harry won't be able to access them. In addition, you might have to get the courts involved to unfreeze assets or perhaps appoint a guardian to manage those funds. And that's all going to take time, and it's going to take money. Without an appropriate, any kind of advanced planning on Sally's part, courts are generally forced to rely on perhaps a next of kin to fill in financial and medical decision-making roles. Harry could even be evicted if the home that they're living in was owned exclusively by Sally, who's now ill and no longer able to manage their finances, right? So let me pause here. Can anybody relate to either Jack and Diane's story or Harry and Sally's? Some of you may, or at least in part. Now, what are some of the other risks that are involved when we're talking about folks who are over 50, cohabiting, unmarried, right? So I'm going to touch on a few of them. The first one is living together and dying without a will. If the deceased fail to write a will or set up a living trust, this means they've died intestate, right? The state is going to distribute his or her assets according to that state's laws. Now, the laws of intestacy don't recognize a surviving unmarried partner. Common law states something different, and we're not addressing that here. But therefore, without anything in writing, they won't be legally entitled to inherit any of the deceased assets. Instead, they'll probably go to blood relatives, or heirs or heirs. So that's certainly something to consider. The other risk comes when you're failing to update in life insurance policies and other beneficiary designations. If an unmarried partner owns assets like, say, a retirement account, 401k, or another employer-sponsored, say, group life insurance policy, and they died, the other partner won't legally be entitled to those assets unless he or she was identified as a beneficiary. Otherwise, the assets are going to go to the deceased's estate, which will eventually go to relatives, if they're blood relatives, if they're alive. Again, according to that a state's particular intestacy rules, right? And the last risk involved in cohabiting over 50, unmarried, is the loss of continued support once the relationship ends. That's certainly a risk. When two people choose to cohabitate, they have no obligation to support each other financially unless they have some sort of agreement stating otherwise, preferably a written agreement, but some sort of agreement stating otherwise. Now, by contrast, in a marriage, one spouse may be entitled to alimony and other support after a divorce. So again, this is not a statement of what life choices are better than the other. This is purely from an estate planning standpoint, sharing what the risks are. Now, regardless of how formal or informal you want your cohabiting relationship to be, communication is key. No one wants to be blindsided. You want to make sure you communicate with your partner, and more importantly, put things in writing. In this episode, I've talked about several tools to protect both you and your partner. It's important to be honest with him or her, as well as the attorney you hire, hopefully, to handle your estate plan. You want to live life on your terms. I get it. But be knowledgeable about the laws in your state and connect with a trusted estate planning attorney who can help you navigate through your 50s and beyond. I've got free resources to help you get started. Visit my website at elsawsmithlaw.com. Go to the resources tab and select which resources meet your needs right now. Then don't just sit there, do something. I want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of Women Winning Wednesdays. I'm Elsa W. Smith, your Maryland estate planning attorney, empowering women through estate planning. I'll see you in my next episode. Take care, everybody.